The program will begin in 10 minutes. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. Our program will begin now.
Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg's Mark Miller.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm the global editor of Bloomberg Live, and very happy that you have made it out here so early in the morning. If you haven't, please get a cup of coffee or a second cup or a third, whatever might be necessary. But we do appreciate you coming out early this morning, and a few people will be arriving as we go, since it is so early. We do have a great program, though, this morning. We'll be doing two news interviews shortly here. The first is with Nicolai Tangen, who's the CEO of Norges Bank Investment Management, and he'll be in conversation with David Rubenstein, the co-founder and co-chairman of Carlyle Group, of course, and also a host on Bloomberg Television of his show Peer to Peer, which is one of my favorite programs on Bloomberg Television, and you'll get to see why when he interviews Nicolai. And then we'll be following that with a focus on the UK. We are delighted to welcome Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, along with Jonathan Reynolds, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, for a conversation with our Editor-in-Chief, John Micklethwaite. But first, we're going to kick things off this morning with a panel on supercharging a new finance hub in the Middle East. This is a session that's sponsored by Invest Saudi and is brought to you by our commercial team at Bloomberg Media. And I'd also like to take a second to acknowledge and thank Invest Saudi for their support for helping us make this program happen this morning. So I am now going to hand it off to my colleague, Sepida Shakpour from Bloomberg Media.
Please welcome to the stage the Minister of Investment for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Excellency Khalid Al-Falih, President and CEO of Franklin Templeton, Jenny Johnson, and Bloomberg's Sepida Shakpour.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Saudi Arabia is at the forefront of a financial transformation, driven by bold reforms and a clear vision to position Riyadh as a dynamic bridge between East and West. Now, it's not only about creating opportunities, but it is also about reimagining what it truly means to be a scalable and globally connected financial hub. And as we explore the topic of scaling and supercharging a new finance hub in the Middle East, we are honored to have with us this morning two of the most influential voices that can lead us through this topic. His Excellency Khalid Al-Falih, Minister of Investment, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Jenny Johnson, President and CEO of Franklin Templeton. Your Excellency, if I may start with you, what are the key elements of Saudi Arabia's reform agenda? And how have these initiatives positioned the kingdom as a leading financial hub in the context of global economy?
Well, thank you very much, Sep, and thanks to Bloomberg for hosting this early morning session. I'm glad we have so many people up early.
Thank the audience for getting up.
And thank you, Jenny, for not only joining me today in this session, but for your belief in the kingdom. Franklin Templeton has been a pillar in our financial markets, and Jenny personally has not only been focused on the financial market, Vision 2030, and the Saudi economy, but she has also been leading in the talent development, especially passionate about women participation, which is something we're extremely proud of, the contribution of our young females in our financial markets. So you ask about reforms and regulations, Seb. Vision 2030, of course, is underpinned by diversification of the economy, building sectors that the kingdom has not been known for. I think everybody knows that the kingdom has been over many decades known as a globally leading energy economy, oil and gas in particular, an economy where we've been comfortable being cash surplus, capital exporting economy. The vision has turned that upside down by putting diversification, building sectors that have not been part of the Saudi economy over the last few decades at the forefront. The other pillar of Vision 2030, of course, is transparency and inclusion of financial markets to provide capital to these growing sectors and to ensure that all the elements of capital markets are existing in terms of the foundational bedrock of any thriving global economy. So transparency, stability, predictability of regulations was key in Vision 2030. As a result, we have introduced and been praised for having best-in-class regulation, the civil transactions law, PPP law. We just introduced an overarching investment law in the kingdom last year, which will go into effect next month. And on top of this, of course, is the financial sector. So the financial sector a few years ago was a local capital markets, Tadawul, that was serving a limited number of companies. And since 2015, and the announcement by His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, that we're going to grow our capital markets, diversify it, and bring all other sectors of the economy to play a leading part in the exchange, as well as different asset classes. We have seen the growth of the financial sector by an order of magnitude. Of course, that has that has been underpinned by inclusion. So we have worked with all of the global indices, MSCI, FTSE, S&P, global emerging markets, which have included Saudi Arabia. We have reached 4% of MSCI as an example. Different asset classes have been introduced, including credit and debt instruments, not just equities where it used to be. And of course, the listing of Saudi Aramco a few years ago has leapfrogged the capital markets of Saudi Arabia from 25 globally to being a top 10. Having said this, I think we're still in the beginning, and one reason we're having this session and other sessions here in Davos and elsewhere is to encourage other people to follow on the footsteps of many global players who have been actively participating in the Saudi market. Today, foreign ownership in the Saudi exchange has reached 100 billion. That's 25x of what it used to be 4 or 5 years ago, and people like Franklin Templeton and Jenny will speak to them about what they're seeing in terms of the governance, the administrative role that the CMA plays in the Tadawul exchange.
Thank you. And double-clicking on the financial sector, Jenny, how would you evaluate the transformation?
Well, so first of all, I think one of the things that I've found unique, and we've been in the region for about 27 years, but is this mentality of generations, right? It's thinking about generations. And so this view of oil won't last forever, and so we need to be deliberate with a plan to diversify the economy. And obviously that's what 2030 is about. I'm not sure there's another place in the world where people, it's almost like that family kind of feel and how you think about it. And so when you build out that plan, and obviously 2030 is the plan, and I remember speaking to a very high U.S. government official who talked about when they first heard about it, they were like, yeah, right, you're going to get 33% of the women in the workforce, or, you know, by 2035 or 2030. And they, by the way, have already achieved that. It has been astonishing. And I brought my executive committee to Riyadh in 2023, and most of them are global investors, but hadn't been to the kingdom since prior to COVID, so usually like 2019, 2018. They were astonished. Their comment was, I've never seen a country change so quickly culturally, as far as just opening up. And so that brings investment opportunity. We decided to open an office. We worked, and you know, what surprised us, one thing was the actual talent that we were there already, who had our CEO is a woman, and just the capability and the talent. And so for us, you know, investors want to invest where there's opportunity and growth. And if you look at, as His Excellency mentioned, you know, they're 4% of the MSCI Emerging Market Index. That's up from 2.7% in 2019. The ability to move over 1% in an index like that when your competitors are also, you know, the other folks are moving, is pretty astonishing. And the view is it'll be within 5 years, 6% of that. And so that means that there are investment opportunities. And so we looked at it as Franklin Templeton as a global investor and said, we need to be here. We need to be participating in this. And we were, the regulators were extremely accessible. You know, they were learning in parts of that. And so they were open to saying, how can we be better at some of this? There were some things that were a little bit cumbersome, but they were committed to you know, making it streamlined to be able to attract capital. And so, you know, you look at it today with over 50% of the GDP in non-oil businesses. It's tourism, entertainment, technology, fintech. That's opportunity for investors. So that's what was attractive to us.
Absolutely. And Jenny, it was a big year for Franklin Templeton last year. You opened an office in Riyadh, and you launched products like Franklin Saudi Bond Fund. And what is driving the interest?
Well, again, anywhere where there's growth, you know, I always say capital goes where capital is treated well. So one is you have to have growth opportunities, right? And that means transparency, good legal framework, and that's what we're finding, right? And so for us, I think you know, if you looked at like the GCC bond index, I think Saudi used to be 18%. They're not 26%. Well, why is that? It's because it's good investment opportunity. So we looked at that and said, look, the rest of the world is going to want to participate in this vision of investment. And so being able to provide, we did an ETF that's a Saudi Arabia equity ETF, and then also a bond fund, so that global investors can participate in the growth. And so that was, you know, that's what our clients want.
Excellent. Your Excellency, you've launched the National Investment Strategy, and just wondering, how has that created immediate opportunities for investors?
Well, in the base economy, I mean, Saudi Arabia is doing quite well. Our GDP, despite fluctuations in the oil market, the constant has been this very healthy growth of the non-oil economy, 4 to 5% year in, year out, no matter what's happening globally. And that, I think, is based on what Jenny said, is we had many sectors in Saudi Arabia that had been underdeveloped, and quite frankly, some of them are not even open to private sector. Healthcare was all government. Tourism was simply religious tourism to Mecca and Medina over the past many decades. So as Vision 2030 opened all of these sectors with great global interest by companies that wanted to invest in the base economy, we've seen this flow of FDI as well as local investors who had been exporting capital, as I mentioned, in the beginning, starting to deploy capital in the economy. When we did Vision 2030 in 21, we had estimated that by 2030 we would deploy the equivalent of $3.3 trillion in the base economy, and of course we were estimating and still expect the financial markets to contribute significantly because we want it to be a private sector-led economy in Saudi Arabia. I'm glad to report as we start 25 that although many people thought you must be crazy, you're not going to be able to get that much capital formation in an economy that is not primed and ready to grow these nascent sectors. I have to say that despite the government slowing down government spending, because we want the private sector to be really the driver of economic growth, and the PIF, important and strong as it is, has been doing less than 15-20% of the investing. But we have exceeded our targets for capital formation up to now, and significant amount of that 3.3 capital has already been deployed in the base economy. That, of course, requires that the sectors themselves are reformed and regulated and opened up, and that investors see that and invest. That has resulted also in many companies being listed in the capital markets. We have been averaging 40 to 50 IPOs within Tadawul. We started 4 or 5 years ago, a small cap market, Numu, and we have over 100 companies already listed. It's the fastest growing market today in the Middle East. Our venture capital is the fastest growing in the region for sure, and probably one of the fastest in the world. We used to be about 10% of the Middle East venture capital. Today we're almost 50% of the Middle East in venture capital, and we've exceeded all surrounding countries with significant amount of VC capital being deployed. Many of our startups have started listing in Numu because of their fast growth and need for capital flow. So I think the interlink between the base economy in Saudi Arabia and the capital markets is getting stronger. I think one area that I would like to point out is, as great as we're doing on equity, one area where we could do more, and Jenny referred to it, is the debt capital market. Today, because our economy and our companies have been conditioned over the last many decades to get their credit from the banks by direct lending, syndicated loans, and the like. And they did not go to the bond market often enough. Today, our debt capital market is less than 4% of GDP. Globally, and for the G20 countries, it's more than 40. So we have a great potential to grow our debt capital market at least by a factor of 10, because our GDP, which is today over $1 trillion, is targeted to be 1.7 as we in the next decade. So that GDP will grow. Private sector participation will grow significantly from where it is today, and we want it to be fueled by the capital markets, including credit coming from issuances of bonds and sukuks, primarily in the Tadawul exchange.
And with that, the question of regulation comes up, Jenny. You've talked about Saudi regulators being among the most accessible. What more could be done to make the regulatory landscape even more appealing for FDI and positioning Riyadh as a leading international hub?
I want to just comment on one thing His Excellency said, which is just, I have to say, sort of early on when everybody, all these asset managers came, right? Everybody's looking and they're like, okay, PIF, SAMA, we can raise money here. And then the awakening happened, which is, wait a second, this is a great place to deploy money. So it's been an interesting sort of evolution that's happened, because you're always looking for great investment opportunities. And again, where you have growth, you have great investment opportunities. But it was like a shift in mindset. So, you know, I have found, Franklin Templeton has found, anytime we have asked to meet with a regulator on whatever topic, they are curious. They want to understand what other markets are doing. They want to understand, is there anything that they're doing that isn't effective to being able to, you know, really be a financial hub. And that's a good thing. That's not always the case in every country. And it's really important as you're trying to get comfort in making investments. And so, you know, like I said, there were a couple things which we've given feedback on. I mean, for example, we had to hire our team and the board of directors before we had the final approval. And I was like, wait a second, what if they don't give us approval? We're going to have this whole staff of people. You know, so there were just some little things, and the feedback was always appreciated and very open. So
incredible. Well, as innovation in the sector expands, I mean, the topic of talent comes up. And Your Excellency, I was wondering, how are you thinking about talent development, given that you have such a young population, and how expats factor into that?
Well, I'll start with the last part, because many people don't realize that Saudi Arabia, with a population of about 33 million, about a third of them, 11 million, if my memory serves me correctly, are expats. They are people that we consider friend and family living amongst us in Saudi Arabia, contributing to our economy. Many of them raised their families in Saudi Arabia. The financial sector in particular has been built over the last 40, 50 years in Saudi Arabia with a great contribution of expatriates from Europe, from the US, from South Asia. Many institutions came and built the Saudi banks today that are leading in the Middle East and beyond, and many of them are global leaders in certain categories of their performance. But I think we're blessed also. We're blessed in Saudi Arabia with a young population, with a very highly educated population. Saudi Arabia in the 70s and 80s, with the wise leadership of the government kings of the past, and currently King Salman and Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has been focused on developing the talent of the kingdom, men and women. We had the scholarship program. We had tens of thousands of people in the 1970s and 80s that are today running many of these institutions, and many of them are in government. I am one of them, pleased that I have been given that privilege of the government supporting. But today, I think we're also blessed that we have tens of universities, public and private, and almost every university has a business program. Almost every company of significance, like the SABICs and the Aramcos, has an academy, and the banks, and that has academies, and host also global MBAs and specialized programs. We have the Financial Academy, which is one of the world's largest and has already graduated 70,000, 80,000 professionals in some of their specialized programs. You look at the banks today in Saudi Arabia, they don't have to localize their workforce, but they're about 95% Saudis. 40% of them are women. So Jenny talked about the global economy overall, doubling women participation in the workforce. So talent is abundant in Saudi Arabia, but the door is wide open for global talent to come. Institutions are welcome to bring their global leaders. We have a premium residency program that in 2 years have issued 7,000, 8,000 premium residencies. A significant amount of them are not for investors or people of high net worth, but targeting professionals who want to come to Saudi Arabia and consider Saudi Arabia their long-term residence and raise their family and improve their career by accessing these continuous learning opportunities through the academic institutions and the professional development programs that are available in the ecosystem.
Amazing. And Jenny, how are you thinking about talent development?
Well, so one thing, and I have to give His Excellency credit for this, because we were at a Milken conference, and I had attended FII, and I had this passion. My personal passion is how do we get more women in the investment business, right? This is a problem globally. And one of the things they look at is that actually girls lose interest in the financial services in high school and college. So if you don't get them by then, chances are it's going to be really hard to attract them. And so I said to His Excellency, I'd really like to do like a women's event there in, I don't know, at the school, and I will get a panel of women or whatever. And you took it and ran with it with my team. And so we ended up at Princess Noor University. At the time, it was just a dinner. We had a great panel of female CEOs. And while I was there, some of the students came up, and they were, it's a women's university, so these were girls there, and they were like, how do we get an internship at Franklin Templeton? I'd love to get, what do we do? I'm an engineer. And at that point, I was like, this is a great opportunity to attract women, talented women into the industry. We should create a program. So we actually launched a program, and Misa was helpful but was with Princess Noor University, where for seniors, they do an 8-week course, which we developed through our academy, that by the end of it, they're actually pretty savvy from investors, right? And then we take a subset to be interns, and we're working with other organizations to take some of these women as interns with the hope that they want to stay in the industry. And we've just done our first class of 150. We're really excited. We've taken 4 interns. We think that it's the kind of program that you could actually take globally. So we're now talking to other markets about, hey, this is a great opportunity. Again, it serves all of us well to have more women in the financial services sector globally. So anyway, leading from Saudi.
Thank you for that. But I would say that it's not just in Princess Noor. Princess Noor is leading in terms of women because it's an all-women university, but every university in Saudi Arabia is co-ed. And it's not just in financial services, which of course is key to this discussion today, but I'm happy that you will find more women than men in tech. King Abdullah University of Science and Technology is our globally leading research university, and there are more women Saudis there than men. King Fahd University, which used to be all men, is now open, both undergraduate and graduate, to female, and as is typical, they are doing extremely well and outperforming their male colleagues in classes, and they're participating. I'm happy that the lead of financial sector in our ministry is with us here. Daniel Jarboa is one of them. She's a great leader, and we have many like her, not just in the ministry, but across government.
Well, it's very difficult to wrap up a question like this, but Your Excellency Jenny, thank you so much for your thought this morning, and we'll hand it over to David Rubinstein. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Please welcome to the stage Nicolai Tangen, CEO of Norges Bank Investment Management, and the host of Peer-to-Peer, David Rubinstein.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be here this morning at an early hour. So you are the CEO of Norges, or Norges, depending on your pronunciation, Investment Management,
Yep.
Which is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world by far, about $1.7 trillion. So tell us what Norges Investment Management really does and what your job is.
Well, the job is to run the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and it has many facets. Of course, one is to lead the investment activity. It was also to develop the organization. There is quite a comprehensive kind of framework around it, working with the board, the ministry, the supervisory board. There is a council of ethics, which keeps us out of unethical investments and so on. So a lot of things involved in the role.
So every sovereign wealth fund has somebody running it, presumably, but virtually no other sovereign wealth fund that I'm aware of has somebody who was a superstar private sector investor, a member of the Giving Pledge, and somebody who's made a lot of money in the private sector. How did you come to do this job and leave your job running a very successful hedge fund?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I had been running this company called AKO Capital for 15 years, and I thought, you know what, kind of the learning is plateauing, and I need to move on in life and do some other things. So I actually was starting to apply to go back to university. And then this job came up, and I thought, wow, it combines asset management, it combines developing an organization, and also to do something good for the country. So it was just perfect.
So where did Norway get all of this money? I mean, $1.7 trillion is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Where did you get all this money?
Well, we'd been drilling on the Norwegian shelf for a long time, and actually this was in '69 in the autumn, like a cold day like today, and they were on the last well, and this was Phillips operating a platform called Ocean Viking, and then 2 o'clock in the morning, this platform chief was told to wake up, the guy in charge, and he's just like, hey, Stolzen, why do you wake me up at 2 in the morning? It was just like, you know what, we found some oil. And it was the biggest find the world had ever seen offshore. And then this was announced to the Norwegian population on the day before Christmas Eve, '69, and so that's where it started.
So if Leif Erikson had not gone to North America and just stayed in Norway, it would have been better for Norway, right? Because he could have discovered the oil there and not have gone to look for riches in North America.
Could be.
So let's talk about the current investment environment. As we talk today, President Trump has been inaugurated in the United States. Yep. Are you worried about some of the America First policies that he has said he's going to pursue, or as a global investment manager, it doesn't really make a difference to you?
Well, it's a complex question because we are a global investor, right? So if we then first disregard all types of policies which can impact society and just look at it from a pure financial point of view, I think in the short term, it'd be really good for our companies in America. There'll be less regulation, there'll be more growth, so that's positive. Now, of course, if there are lots of tariffs, our European companies will be hit by it, so that'd be negative. And then, of course, also there is a big question whether the policies will be inflationary, which would be bad news in the longer term.
So let's talk for a moment about Norges Investment Management. When was it actually set up? The oil was discovered in, what, 1969?
Yeah.
All right, so when was this organization set up?
It was set up in '96. And the first deposit there was like 2 billion Norwegian kroner. It's grown to 20,000 billion. So good growth.
So now the money that comes in from the oil and you invest it, does that money go to every citizen in Norway every year, or does it just stay in the Central Reserve for the use of the government?
Well, I would say there are a couple of clever things that the politicians did at the time. They also established what is called the spending rule. So you can only spend 3% of the fund every year, and 3% of the fund goes into the budget. Now, the fund is now so large that it accounts for 25%, or between 20 and 25% of the state budget. But I think it's very good to have that rule in place.
All right, so 25% of the government's budget comes from what you do every year.
Yeah, and my 700 colleagues.
How many people actually work for you now?
Well, so we got roughly 700. We have we got 100 in New York, 140 in London. We got 40 in Singapore, and the rest would be in Oslo.
So do people pay an enormous amount of attention to your investment success? Does everybody in Norway look every day in the newspapers and see how you're doing, because that will affect Norway's government, or not?
Well, not only every day. We have it on our website. We have a ticker which shows the real value of the fund at all times, and it's updated 13 times every second. So
that's a lot of pressure. Every hour people are paying attention to what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So your job, though, is to oversee several hundred people making investment decisions. Do they come to you if it's a really big investment decision and say, we're going to put $100 million in something, or is it you're just doing strategic things and you're not making the individual investment decisions.
Well, it's since it's such a large fund, you need to be pretty index near in what you're doing. And we have a very good investment mandate, which we get from the Ministry of Finance, and then we follow that. And then we have decentralized the various investment mandates within the firm.
So do people in Norway or the government criticize you saying you bought too much Apple stock or you didn't buy enough Apple stock, or you don't get those kind of criticisms?
That's exactly right. So we always make mistakes, and that's always in the papers. Because either you have too much or you have too little. Or, when you own a bit of 9,000 companies across the world, there is always something going wrong somewhere, and we always own it, and so we are always criticized.
So if you own a piece of 9,000 companies and you only invest, I think, in publicly traded companies,
yeah.
If you own that many companies, are you not really an index fund, and are you going to get better rates of return than any index fund is going to get?
Well, in a way, we are a very index-near fund. And we have had better returns than the index over the years. We outperformed by some 20 basis points per year for 28 years or so. And we are doing it at lower costs than index funds. We are super cost efficient.
So you're getting roughly rates of return of 5 or 6% a year, I assume, something like that?
6, 7.
Okay, 6 or 7% a year.
Yeah.
And that's roughly, on average, 20 basis points over than what the index funds are typically doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Why, I'm just curious, as somebody who's been in private equity, why don't you go into the private equity world? Because over the last 20 or 30 years, private equity has done pretty well, private investments. How come you would resist that?
Yeah. So the fund or the board have suggested to the ministry several times that we think private equity would be a good thing. So far, the answer has been no. And there is a political process going on where they will now make a decision on that. The reasons have been fees, which...
The fees aren't high enough, or...?
No, some people think they are too high.
Too high?
Yeah, too high. Transparency hasn't been good enough. There hasn't been enough kind of ESG considerations and so on. And so those have been the historic reasons. Now, the world is clearly changing. There are fewer companies listed on the stock exchange. The private market is much bigger. You get probably better fees than we did in the past, and so on. So these are considerations that the ministry will make.
Well, as we talk today, in the United States at least, ESG and DEI seem to be in less favor than they were maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Is that the case in Norway?
No.
Oh, so you don't really care what the U.S. is doing in this regard?
Well, there is clearly a backlash against ESG, right? But the policies we have, they are anchored in the Parliament, and so we are not changing our mind. We think it's important with client reporting. We think diversity is good, and so on.
So in most Scandinavian countries, I think certainly in Norway, there's concern about climate change, and there's a lot of interest in renewable energy. But you make your money from non-renewable energy. So is there an incongruity when you're making all this money from carbonized kind of chemicals and fuels, but you really don't believe in that to some extent? How do you square that?
Well, we believe in it, and we do think that, in particular, the gas that Norway produces, which is a very high proportion of the gas supply in Europe, is very, very important, and it continues to be a big part of the energy supply and important for security for many, many years to come.
Let's talk about your own background. You weren't just working your way up in the government of Norges Investment Management. You were very successful, as I said earlier, in the private sector. Where were you born? I
was born in a small town in southern Norway, Kristiansand, which not many people have heard about.
And were your parents investment managers?
No, my mother worked in the public sector with museums and art, and my father was an entrepreneur.
And where did you go to school?
I started off in Norway. I studied Russian in the intelligence service. I went to Wharton, did business undergrad, and then I have done some degrees afterwards. I've done one in art history and one in social psychology.
Is it unusual for somebody in Norway to go to college at Wharton School in Philadelphia? It's a great school.
Yeah, but it's it's not so common.
So when you went to Wharton and you said you're from Norway, did people in Wharton say, where is that? Or?
Yeah, of course.
And did they make fun of Norway? Did they say you were a Viking or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was.
Okay. Okay, so you graduate from Wharton and you get other degrees. You set up your own hedge fund.
I mean, the cool thing is, you come from Norway, which is like a very egalitarian society, and it's all about being very humble and so on. And then you come to Wharton, which is just like the opposite. It's like, I remember, I went to class one day and it's just like, hey, what do you guys want to do? I just want to conquer the world. And everybody applauded. I didn't say that, but somebody else said, and people applauded. And it was just like a mindset, totally different.
So you didn't find a lot of humility at Wharton?
Not so much.
Okay. So you graduated. Did you go into the private sector right away?
Yeah, I went, then became an analyst with a stockbroking firm. I worked there for 5 years. Then I joined my largest client, which was a hedge fund and one of the earliest hedge funds in Europe.
Where was it based?
London.
All right, so you worked out of London.
Yeah.
When did you say, I'm going to set up my own hedge fund?
Well, so that was a bit afterwards, because I had worked for this hedge fund for 5 years, made some money, and I took a break. So I did a master's in art history, but realized I wasn't very good at it. So
how do you know you're not good at art history? I mean, you don't measure it the way you do investments.
Well, you get feedback from the professor that you're not the brightest thing, okay? So I thought, hey, I'm better at looking at stocks than paintings, and so let's set up this firm instead.
But you built a big art collection, so you must know something about art.
Yeah, but it's easier to buy art than write about art.
Okay. So you set up your own hedge fund eventually.
Yeah.
And how big was it before you stopped it?
Roughly just under $20 billion. So it was one of the largest funds in Europe. And I'm really proud of what we did there. We had many of the largest endowments and universities in the world investing with us. So it was a fantastic thing.
So you have $20 billion hedge fund, and you're averaging rates of return, I assume, that are in double-digit kinds of areas, right? And so when you got this opportunity to run Norges Investment Management, did you say to your family, guess what, I'm not going to be making that much money anymore, and we have to live more conservatively?
Yeah.
And what did they say? They were happy with that?
Yeah.
Wow. I guess.
Well, I mean, it's not like I got enough money to buy food and shoes.
Yeah, but usually hedge fund managers don't say they need to have enough money to buy the food. They want to buy airplanes and art and other things.
Yeah, and I think that's a misconstrued perception of what happiness is. In my mind, happiness is about learning. That's how you measure happiness, is how much you have learned. Some people say, you measure success by who's got the most money when they die, and I just think that's totally a failure. I mean, the person who's got the most money when he or she dies, that they have lost. They haven't got it.
Uh-oh, I didn't realize that. So,
well, you done this.
All right, so that's something I got to learn. But okay, so all right, so you set up your hedge fund, but when you left your hedge fund, did you have other people running it? Is it still around?
Absolutely, still around. So it was a fantastic thing. It's been a great transition to the next generation. Really, really nice. They are doing better than ever, and it's just a total win-win. So, but when I left for the position in Norway, I had to give away my ownership stake. So I gave it to a charitable foundation. And so the stake in the hedge fund is funding that charitable foundation. So
you did so well that you actually joined the Giving Pledge.
Yeah.
Right, which means you've got a net worth of at least $1 billion or so. Are you the only person in Norway that signed the Giving Pledge?
There's one more.
One more, okay. So when you go to the Giving Pledge meetings, do you say, guess what, I'm giving away money now, but I'm really running the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, or people don't talk to you about what you do now?
No, they talk about that too.
And
that's where we met.
That's correct. So for 5 years you've been running this fund and done pretty well, obviously. Now your term is up. You have another 5-year term you could get. And
I applied last week.
You applied. Okay, do you have to apply, or you already have the job?
No, it has to be, you have to apply again. So I updated my CV and applied.
Wow, okay. Did anybody else apply? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, when it comes to this, I'm very, very humble. If they find anybody else who's better at doing that job, he or she should get that job, right? It's a very important position in the country. And so I have applied. I hope I will get an extension. If not, I need to do something else.
So you're willing to do another 5 years?
Yeah.
And your compensation as the person running it is modest, I assume, compared to what you used to make.
Yeah, it's a well-paid job, but it's of course it's a public sector job.
Okay. So, any thought about going into politics and running for government positions, prime minister or something like that?
No.
You don't want to go into that. No interest in that.
No.
And what about any thing after you're finished? Let's suppose you do another 5 years.
Yeah.
And for 10 years of this, you probably would say that's enough.
Well, I'm going to spend the rest of my life hopefully doing good things, you know. I'd love to go back to university at some stage, do another degree, learn some more things.
Art history, but you're not that good at that, so you would do something else, you think? No. Okay. But you have a big art collection still. In what area do you collect art?
Well, we have the biggest collection of Nordic modernist art, and we've given that to a museum which opened last year. New York Times recently said it was one of the 50 most important places to go in 2025, so you all have to go, of course.
So if somebody is watching this and they've never been to Norway, what would you say about what is great about Norway that would deserve their visiting? What can you see in Norway?
Well, the nature is unrivaled. I mean, it's just like Switzerland with a lot of sea around it, right? And it's absolutely beautiful. You're really close to the fjord, you're close to the mountains, it's good for skiing, it's good for hiking. It's perfect. And not too many people, so it's not so crowded.
Well, how many total people are there in
5 million.
5 million.
Yeah.
So when Alfred Nobel was awarding his, developing his Nobel Prizes, he had the prizes being given by people in Sweden, the Swedish academies. But he didn't think the Swedes were peaceful, loving people. So he said the Peace Prize is given by people in Norway.
Yeah.
So Norway is very peaceful.
Yes.
And you have no interest in getting involved in international diplomatic things or something like that?
No.
Okay. And your children, are they interested in investing?
No. Thankfully. I mean, thank God for that. Because I think, in my mind, you just don't want to follow your parents. You want to create your own destiny. You don't want to be measured against the success of your parents. You know, I don't really believe in inheritance. I think to inherit a lot of money is not a good thing. If you are successful, it's just because you inherited a lot of money, and if you fail, you are a total failure because you started with a lot of money and you didn't manage to do it. Right. So I just think it's so, you know, let them do what they want.
So do you ever go to reunions at Wharton and say, hey, I wasn't bragging?
I was on the board. I was on the board at
you
Wharton
were.
for some time, yeah.
But I guess they ask for contributions from time to time.
Yeah.
And, okay. But
I did give them a building.
But all the people in your class who were bragging about how great they were and they were going to conquer the world, did you ever show up and say, look, you're the guy that actually did it and you didn't brag about doing that? You didn't say that?
I never felt that I conquered the world. No.
Okay. So today, if I was looking for some good investment ideas, let's suppose somebody's watching and say, what is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world thinking is a good idea? What would you say are a couple good ideas?
No, I think if you're a long-term investor like we are, you want to be widely diversified across asset classes, across geographies. It's very, very tough to do this tactical asset allocation. I think that's nearly impossible. The best thing to do is always to do the opposite of everybody else. And what would that be today? Well, if you were to do the opposite of everybody else, it would be to sell the U.S. tech stocks, you know, buy China, sell private credit, you know, just buy stuff which is out of fashion. But it's very, very tough to do. Because if you are contrarian and you are different from your benchmarks and so on, there will be periods where you underperform. And everybody is going to question your sanity.
What about artificial intelligence? Is that a good area to invest in now?
It has been fantastic. And we have made a lot of money for the fund. You know, the biggest contributors of the last few years have, of course, been the big American AI companies. And I polled people in Norges just before Christmas when I asked them, how much more efficient are you now because of the new tools? And on average, people thought they were 15% more efficient. Really good.
So NVIDIA is still a good stock to buy?
Well, that I don't know. But for sure, they make good products.
So today, when you look at your investment team, do they come in every week and say, here's some ideas we have? And do you tell them yes, no, or you just listen to what they recommend?
Well, they would decide. I think, you know, in order to really judge how they're doing, they need to be totally accountable, and you can't interfere in the investment process. So I don't interfere in their investment process.
So are your employees mostly Norwegian, or are they from all nationalities?
It's 50-50.
Okay, and what about you have Americans as well investing?
Of course, they are good people.
Okay. And what about pushing for more private equity allocations? You're not ready for that yet?
We're not pushing. We have given our advice to the government, and we'll see what they come up with.
Okay. So today, are you worried about your borders because of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine? Is that something you worry about in terms of the impact of Russia-Ukraine on your investment? appetite for things like that?
No, it's not really. It's not really. We have real tragedies many places in the world, but I'm not worried about Russia invading Norway anytime soon. We are a member of NATO. We do border to Russia, but now, since Finland and Sweden joined NATO, we feel stronger than before.
Okay, so today, what would you say your biggest investment concerns are? You're running $1.7 trillion fund. For the average person not managing that much money, what should they be worrying about, and what are you worrying about?
No, I think you've got two things. One, you have the known unknowns, right? So, and there at the top of my list would be two things. One is inflation, because I think there is an argument in a tight labor market when you potentially decline the supply or reduce the supply of labor. In the US, you put on tariffs. These things can be inflationary, and there could be a moment where, given the high level of government debt, that the investors suddenly decide, you know what, we want a much higher coupon to lend to, to governments. And so you could see a step up in interest rates, which could be negative for financial markets. Then, of course, all the AI-related stocks, the epicenter here is Taiwan, so you need to watch that. But then the thing is that the thing that really scares us when it happens is the unexpected, whether it be a meltdown of nuclear reactors in Japan or COVID or financial crisis. It's the stuff you cannot model which really derails markets. And they come about every so often, and there will be another one coming up.
So let's suppose I'm one of the people interviewing you for your application to have this job for the next 5 years. What would you say is the reason that you deserve the job? You've done pretty well, or you like the job, or people are happy, or your rate of return has been very good. What would you say is the reason you should get this job?
I mean, it's a bit odd to market myself for a job on TV, but
well, you're too modest for that. But what would you say?
We've done. The organization has done well. Okay. It's a real teamwork. We built a really great team. We have done a lot of great things. We are now the most transparent fund in the world. We've done a lot of things like that, right? And there's always lower risk to take the incumbent than changing. But as I said, there are just pros and cons, and there are other people out there who are really, really excellent.
Now, sovereign wealth fund leaders, do they get together from time to time and exchange ideas, like whoever runs?
Yeah, we do. It's great, actually. There is a lot of cooperation between the large funds.
And when you see the other people running these big funds, do you ever say, "How did they get this job?" Or you say, "Boy, they're really smart"?
Oh, they're generally really smart.
Not how did they get this job? They're all pretty good.
Oh, they're generally really smart. There are so many things that can go wrong when you run a large fund like that, and I would say there haven't been any major disasters, and that's good, and that's because of the great team we have working together.
You ever thought of running a Norwegian tracking fund that basically let people invest their money, just tracks your fund, and they could do that?
No, there's been some talks about it, but no, that's not going to happen. And I'm never going to run money again after this job. This is my last money job.
Really, you're not going to go back and manage money again?
No.
Why not? Just you've made enough money.
No, it's not that. It's just like I've had this job. I think it's the most fun job in global finance, and I just don't think there's anything else out there.
All right. So what do you do for outside activities? Are you a skier, or you're some other kind of outdoor activities?
I spend a lot of time in nature. I walk in the forest. I do cross-country skiing. I pick mushrooms in the autumn.
You do what?
Mushrooms. Not the magic ones, the ones you eat.
Yeah, I was wondering. Okay. What do you pick them, or you grow them, or what?
No, you walk around in the forest and you pick wild mushrooms, and you go home and you cook them, and you make, like chanterelle spaghetti.
Wow, that's an unusual.
And then I sail. I do a lot of sailing.
Singing?
Yeah, sailing.
Sailing. You're a sailor.
Yeah.
And are you doing competitions or things?
Well, I did competition in the past. I did like Sydney Hobarts and all that kind of stuff. But
when you're sailing, do the people give you a right away because you're running the biggest sovereign wealth fund? They don't give you a little bit of a head start or something?
No.
Wow. Okay, so generally you strike me as a very happy person. And I generally don't find that many happy people in the investment world. They're always worried about something else, but you're pretty happy. So how did you get to be so happy?
I think it has to do how you define. Well, first of all, you have to figure out what is it that makes you happy.
Right.
And I do think people mistake that quite often. You know, they just try to make more money, try to buy more things. That's not where true happiness comes from. It comes from spending time with friends and family and learning. And in terms of learning, you know, I also, as you know, I also do a podcast, and I learn a lot through that podcast.
Okay, well,
Are you going to be on it at some stage? You probably.
I will, but where did you meet your wife?
At a nightclub.
A nightclub. A nightclub.
Yeah, but we were introduced through some friends, and interestingly,
it wasn't just a regular pickup. It was just
it was organized a bit.
Organized, okay.
But the thing was that first time I asked her, she said no, and so that's just like why I never take no for an answer.
But you didn't say I'm going to be I'm running the Norges.
No, this was long way before.
I know, but you didn't say someday I'll be doing that.
I was really poor.
You were not wealthy then.
Oh, I had no money, just lots of debt.
Maybe that's why she said no. Okay. All right. So today, if you're giving advice to somebody that's watching this about how to be a good investment manager, what is the single most important piece of investment advice you could give somebody?
Learn, learn, learn. And the combination of being stubborn and agile, you know, you have to stick with your guns, you have to believe in what you do, you have to be able to be contrarian, but when things change, you have to change your mind. And that's the rarest combination in investment management.
So you think humility is better than arrogance in a good investor?
Well, you need to be confident. Humility is the magic.
Have you ever met Warren Buffett?
No.
Really? And no interest in meeting him? He hasn't called you for advice? But he hasn't called you for ideas or anything like that? No?
No, but I haven't met him. I met him briefly.
Okay. So is there one person that is a role model for you? If it's not Warren Buffett, maybe it is, even though you haven't met him, is there anybody you would say is somebody you have as a role model in the investment area?
Well, I think it's difficult to not mention Bill Gates as a role model if you are a philanthropist, because you make a lot of money and then you are very organized and structured in the way you give it away. I think that's really impressive.
Oh, okay. So, look, it's an incredible career, and I would just urge you to consider private equity as something you might do in the future, okay? Thanks very much.
I hear you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Please welcome to the stage the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the United Kingdom, Rachel Reeves, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Reynolds, and Bloomberg's Editor-in-Chief, John Micklethwaite.
Rachel Reeves, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Johnny Reynolds, Secretary of State for Trade and Business. Welcome to Bloomberg House. You're here to sell Britain, and we'll come back to that in just a second. But three bits of news maybe to deal with first. And the biggest, the most obvious, is Donald Trump's inauguration. He's already kicked off with tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Now he's talking about China. You know, Britain is an unusually open economy. I think we're arguing about the numbers downstairs, but by some counts, 60% of trade equivalent to 60% of GDP. I suppose my question is, how vulnerable are we to this, especially given the fact that we've already come out of the European Union? One of you.
I'll start on trade.
Your trade.
Good morning, everyone. It's, going around Davos, making eye contact with all your trade ministerial counterparts, you can imagine what is on our minds, right, and the conversation. But I think there's a few things on this. First of all, yes, the UK is a very globally orientated, trade-intensive economy. That is a good thing. That openness to the rest of the world will be championed by this government, and actually there are opportunities to expand on that. I think that's a unique selling point in terms of our relationship with the Gulf and the trade deal we're negotiating, our aspirations with India, the EU reset, hopefully maybe some things with the US that come out of this, the China engagement that you have kicked off, Chancellor. So, yes, there's a vulnerability there, but there's a strength that comes from that openness to the world as well, so let's recognise that. The second thing is, look, we understand there is a genuine analysis in the US that feels that the very big trade deficits in goods that the US has, both with the EU and with China, the sense of unfairness that is the proof point of, we understand that. We might disagree, but we'll engage with that. Now, you're right to say we are an incredibly globally orientated economy, but also we obviously don't have that trade, the US does not have that trade deficit on manufactured goods with the UK. Amusingly, I said this to the Cabinet last week, but the UK and the US actually believe we have a surplus with each other on goods because of asymmetric statistical quirks. So there's the basis for a conversation there as to the future. But, it will be a choppy time to be a trade minister. There's no doubt about that. But our job is to navigate through that. You don't get to pick the world as you want it to be. You get the world as it is. And I do believe, the unique pitch from the United Kingdom can be, first of all, a return to political stability, which we appreciate after the Brexit referendum has been challenging in the UK, but that's also relative to some other European countries as well. That pitch to openness, and then I know something you'll want to get into, which is the willingness of this new government to use its mandate, to use the opportunity we have to fundamentally improve the business and investor environment in the UK.
So can I come on to that straight away? Because another piece of news is overnight you got rid of the chairman of the Competition and Markets Authority, and people conceived that as being a pro-growth, pro-deregulation, because one of the things about Trump is, yes, business people at Davos are scared of his trade wars, but they do like the pro-growth, deregulatory side of Trump. Is this a sign of more things to come in terms of regulation?
Well, growth is the #1 mission of this new Labour government. 6 months in, we are building the foundations to deliver that strong growth that has eluded the UK for far too long, more than a decade of very slow, sluggish economic growth. And we want our regulators to be part of that growth mission. Now, of course, the regulators are independent, and the chair of the CMA decided to step down. But he recognised that this government have got a different strategic approach when it comes to regulation. And he recognised it was time for him to move on and make way for somebody who does share the mission and the strategic direction that this government are taking. So, look, we wrote, myself, Johnny, the Prime Minister, to all of the regulators. There's more than 100 regulators in the UK. We've written to all of them and said, what can you do to reorientate your organisation to regulate, not just for risk, and of course regulating for risk is important, but regulating for growth. I've done it with the financial services regulators. We've now done it with all of the regulators. And I've got to say, the responses we've had, a lot of them have been incredibly positive about things that they can do.
Would you, on financial services, you just mentioned that, would you ever consider ring fencing? We are unusual in Britain in the sense we've ring-fenced banks. We've said, look, you have to put your retail banks separate. In an era where Trump and other people are pushing ahead with deregulation on lots of fronts, is that an area you would also look? You just mentioned financial services.
We'll always keep an open mind about things. Already, since the election of President Trump, the PRA, prudential regulator, has pushed back the implementation for Basel III. So that was going to be January 2026. We've pushed that back for a year. We're ahead of the European Union in recognising that the world has changed, and so we've put back that date. I think that shows that our regulators are willing to be pragmatic, recognise the importance of attracting investment into the UK and not being out of kilter with our major trading partners and our major competitors. So I think you're already seeing that. We saw the letter from the Financial Conduct Authority to the government just last week about what they might be able to do to drive investment, drive growth in the UK, with a number of practical proposals. That's what this government wants to implement, practical things to make it easier to invest in Britain, make it easier to get things done in Britain, because that's how we drive growth.
There's a very good example of that, which is my third piece of news, which people are talking about, is the idea that next week, there's been a leak ahead of it, that you would say, go ahead with the third runway at Heathrow, go ahead with the expansion of Gatwick, maybe the bridge over the Thames as well. You know, that would be a sign you're prepared to take tough decisions that help growth.
We've already taken a number of big decisions on City Airport, on Stansted Airport, on a number of planning decisions that this government have called in that were on the desks of ministers in the previous government, on housing, on data centres, in the creative industries. I'm not going to sort of comment on speculation about what I may or may not say next week, but Johnny started with a sort of pitch that Britain is an open, trading, vibrant economy. We want to remain as such.
To use your example of taking tough decisions, if you push ahead with Heathrow, that might cause problems with Sadiq Khan, might cause problems with your colleague Ed Miliband from Environment.
This is the problem with the last government. There was always somebody that said, oh yes, of course we want to grow the economy, but we don't like that investment, or we don't like that wind farm, we don't like those pylons, we don't like that airport, we don't want that housing near us. The answer can't always be no. And that's been the problem in Britain for a long time, that when there was a choice between something that would grow the economy and sort of anything else always won. Now, of course, there are other things that matter, but when we say that growth is the #1 mission of this government, we mean it, and that means it trumps other things. And so we're making pro-growth decisions in the national interest.
I feel on this, John, as well. I genuinely feel there is, in the UK and perceptions of the UK, at the minute, people haven't quite recognised how resolved this group of people in the new cabinet in the UK are to make these decisions to make a difference, right? And I know that the proof points of that are not what we say or what strategies we publish, but the kind of decisions that we seek to make. But when Rachel says growth is the #1 mission, you know, that's about attracting private capital to the UK. That's about getting things done more quickly. There are things we know the UK needs. I mean, look, we could all tell stories of UK infrastructure that, you know, there's a famous example of the M6 toll was sort of initiated under the Callaghan government and delivered by the Blair Labour government. You know, I mean, we've got to do things quicker and better. And I think people don't yet quite appreciate how resolved we are to do that.
Isn't that, I mean, to come to the point, isn't that to do with, in some ways, the budget? I mean, if you talk to people here, they will come up with a variety of complaints. They'll talk about fiscal headroom, which we'll come back to. But their basic point with the budget was they thought that came across as something that was not in favour of wealth creation. You know, at the heart of it, it had big pay rises for public sector workers, paid for big taxes on business. And that is the main thing when you wander around the halls of Davos, you just come back from New York, that you seem to have started on the foot of being people who are not pro-business. So it's not just to do with these past decisions to do with Conservatives, it's to do with that particular thing with the budget. And do you wish you'd done things differently there?
When I became Chancellor, there was this £22 billion gap between what the previous government were bringing in revenues this year and what they were spending. It wasn't some years in the future, it was an in-year gap that hadn't been disclosed to the independent forecasters, hadn't been disclosed to Parliament. You had an idea of it because if you looked at the monthly borrowing numbers, every month it was coming in a billion or two above what the independent forecaster had suggested the government would be borrowing on a monthly basis. But until we were elected, we did not know the scale of that inheritance. Now, I said during the election campaign that I would never play fast and loose with the public finances. Liz Truss did that, the previous government did that, and it caused untold damage in terms of borrowing costs and confidence in the UK. So I had to get a grip of the public finances, and that did mean difficult decisions, actually, on welfare, on spending, and on taxation to get the public finances under control. And I strongly believe, and I think businesses instinctively know this too, that stability is the prerequisite for economic growth. You can't grow an economy unless you have that stability. So we've now wiped the slate clean under the sort of economic and fiscal mismanagement of the previous government. It did require difficult decisions. I'm not immune to the challenges posed by the increases in tax. But let's look at the alternative. The alternative was that I did half measures, and then everyone would know that I'd have to come back for more next year, or I swept things under the carpet and pretend those problems didn't exist, but they would reassert themselves at some stage. What businesses can know is that our public finances are now in order. We're never going to have to come back again and do a budget like that. So we have the stability upon which we can now build as a government and as a country.
There's a limit, though, how much you can blame back on the Tories. I don't think anyone here regrets the Tories going. But you look at the numbers. The British Chambers of Commerce said that British business confidence is its lowest ebb since Liz Truss's mini-budget. 2/3 are worried about tax. Half say they'll have to raise prices. Firms are already cutting back on investment and employment. The British economy is actually smaller now than when the Tories left.
You've given the bad news. Let me tell you two pieces of good news. PwC survey that came out on Monday, whilst you were here in Davos, showed that we are second to the UK as a place to invest for global CEOs. That is the first time in 28 years to the US. It's the first time in 28 years that Britain has been in that position. That is good news and is a vote of confidence in the UK. The IMF forecast that came out last Friday revised up growth for the UK this year and puts us top of the pack of the major European economies. So we can trade surveys and data, but, you know, I'm here to sell Britain, to talk about the strengths and what we are doing. We're reforming the planning system, we're reforming our regulatory system, reforming pensions, and also this year we're going to be publishing an immigration white paper. And although we know that we need to bring immigration down, particularly illegal immigration, into the UK, we are going to look again at routes for the highest skilled people, visas particularly in areas like AI and life sciences, because Britain is open for business. We are open for talent. We've got some of the best universities, some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, but we also want to bring in global talent into Britain.
There's no complacency by any of us. I would say the challenge of our inheritance has made us even more resolved to do those things that Rachel has described, because we wanted to do them, we thought they were essential. I think that case is even more compelling as a result of what we have inherited. It comes back to this. People should not doubt how resolved we are to make a difference. It's not just about the economic performance and what it means for our constituents. Of course, that's important. It's also about, to be honest, the legitimacy of the political system, showing people that, you know, government can make a difference to their lives, avoiding some of the populist pressures which are evident and discussed quite widely at an event like this. We know what's at stake, and that's why we're going to deliver.
Do you, on this issue, which you hear again and again from people here, this issue of wealth creation, I just saw Tony Blair walking on the street. He was famously relaxed about wealth creators getting wealthier. You listen to people here, they'll say taxes, you've got taxes on business, taxes on wealth, taxes on school fees. You've got small businesses spending all their time now worrying about inheritance tax. Non-DOMs complain, say you're Rachel Leaves, not Rachel Reeves, because they're all heading abroad. The record of left-of-centre governments that are unpopular with business or start on the wrong terms with business is not a good one. You think of François Hollande in France. You know, there is a problem there, and beyond sort of announcing some things around the edge, what are you going to do to change that idea that is out there at the moment, that you're not in favour of wealth creation? Maybe you can correct that now. Look, are you relaxed about wealth creation?
Oh, absolutely, and we want, as I just said, the best talent, the best people to come to Britain, create jobs in Britain to grow our economy. We had an international investment summit 2 months into the Labour government. £63 billion of inward investment into the UK, primarily in AI and in clean energy. That is incredibly exciting and shows the strengths that we have as an economy. I'm not going to apologise for the budget because although I hear criticism, what I don't hear is any real alternatives. If you're a CEO or a CFO and you're coming into a new business and you've got these massive problems with your finances, you have to stabilise them. And that requires difficult decisions. But if you don't make those decisions, you're going to be plagued by them for years to come. So we have now wiped the slate clean. Businesses can be confident of that. My instinct is to have lower taxes, less regulation, make it easier for businesses to do business. But unless you can have that economic and fiscal stability, then, to be honest, I think that you're not going to have any serious plan for economic growth. We saw that under the previous government. We've seen that governments around the world that get into financial difficulty. We have avoided that through the difficult decisions that we've made. But on every other area, I think businesses will say, on regulation, on planning, on pensions, on capital markets reform, that we are doing the things that are needed to unlock economic growth.
I'm going to come back to the issues of other things you could do in a second with Johnny, but first with you, this particular issue of stability and the issue, as you know, about fiscal headroom. You know, you left yourself a very small kind of buffer. I looked at 0.3% of GDP, or to put it another way, that's $9.9 billion, £9.9 billion against total public spending of more than 1.3 trillion. So very little margin for error. You've seen all those moves in the bond markets, which you'll point out have been corrected, but each time that happens, it kind of pushes through the buffer. You know, are you at some point going to have to make a bigger buffer at some time?
I set out the two fiscal rules that this government will meet. The first is that we will pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts. Previous government didn't achieve that in 14 years, and that we would bring debt down as a share of GDP. We meet those rules 2 years early. We meet both of those in year 3 of the forecast at the moment. And in the final year of the forecast, there's a £9.9 billion amount of headroom. That is more headroom than we inherited from the previous government. We actually put more money into increasing that
theirs was a famously small amount as well.
Yeah, so it's tight. And those fiscal rules are important to us because they are the sort of bedrock of foundation of that stability that I've spoken about. So we will continue to make decisions to ensure that we meet those fiscal rules. I'll just say another thing about the fiscal rules and why we chose to pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts. That is so important for this government, to get a grip of day-to-day spending, because that allows us to free up money to invest in capital infrastructure projects, whether that is energy or transport or in tech, compute capability, for example. And we're only able to unlock £100 billion during the course of this Parliament for those capital projects, additional £100 billion, because this government are getting a grip of day-to-day spending. And some of you would have heard our Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, and our Science and Innovation Secretary, Peter Kyle, yesterday speak about the possibilities that tech have to transform our public services, to get better value for the money that we put into them by using tech better. The creation of a government digital app that will have our driving licences on and other things by the end of this year, using tech to cut out some of the costs in the back office functions of government. The more costs we can take out, the less we have to do on the tax side, the better services we will deliver for citizens, and the more we can free up to invest in that capital, the projects that can help transform our economy.
Sounds as if you're going down the same route as Elon Musk with his Department of Government Efficiency.
Well, look, we want to root out waste in government spending. I think maybe the
first comparison you've had.
I'm not going to go troll presidents.
Just one last thing on that the fiscal headroom. You've got the Office of Budget Responsibilities forecast updates at the end of March 26th. I suppose my question is, can you leave it that long? If you're riding a bicycle and you hit the curb twice, you tend to move a bit closer to the centre of the road, don't you? You've already had 2 incidents where the sheer rise in borrowing costs, which occasionally happens, could have wiped out that buffer. Isn't that something you're going to have to deal with eventually?
Well, there's been undoubtedly global movements in financial markets this year, mainly driven by the US, but of course the UK gets caught in those headwinds. The Office of Budget Responsibility are just starting their forecast process, and they don't take into account just 1 week's moves in financial markets. They look at a period of time. But I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves. There's a couple of months before that OBR forecast is published. I will respond to that in the proper way and make sure that we continue to meet those fiscal rules.
Johnny, can I kind of come to you on the issue of growth again? It strikes me, you look at a lot of the things you've been talking about, the Chancellor's been talking about, planning reform, infrastructure strategy, pensions reform, making regulators more friendly. Those are quite kind of long-term things, whilst what business is looking for desperately is something short-term to make up for the tax rises. Is there anything you particularly can sort of focus on there?
I would come back a little bit on that, John, because I think what business wants to fundamentally see from us is, are we good for our word? When we say growth's the mission, how are we going to prove that? How are we going to convince people that that is absolutely where our political priorities will lie? Exactly as Rachel has said, they've heard from other people, other governments in the past. They want to know when you get that countervailing pressure, oh, but what about this? What about that? What about that person not liking it? Are we going to say, no, this is the mission and this is the imperative? And we are. So I don't think it's about people just banking the long term, because the one thing the UK has needed in the last few years is more of a long-term, serious focus. Let's be frank. We've been bobbing along from one Prime Minister to the next, sometimes month to month, right? So they want that long-term focus. And I think that's where you get the confidence. If people do not look at the UK, they risk missing out, right? That's genuinely the case, because this is a government so resolved to make the difference, because we know that is what we have to do. So I don't think it's a question of, okay, people think the long term's great, they want the short term. They want to see that long term following through and the commitment that comes with that. And then they will see when, some of the pressures, some of the conversations about the global trading position, the leadership role the UK will take in terms of open markets being a key part of that. I mean, as we both said, we want to stress, we recognise the challenge of our inheritance and how we've got to provide people with the confidence and the certainty for the future. It is important to say we're still, you benchmark, payroll taxation in the UK still very internationally competitive. Capital gains tax, corporation tax lowest in the G7 with the best allowances available. So there's a compelling competitive offer there. But what you need, I think, to generate that confidence is people recognising this is a government serious about building.
Surely the single thing that you could do that would give the most amount of growth is to do a fresh deal with Europe. To do something like a customs union. That's what virtually every number that people have run on that shows the biggest increase in GDP compared with all the other things you're talking about.
It's first of all, will this debate ever end? I mean, I
didn't say rejoining the European Union. I said something akin to a customs union.
I would say something like this. That first of all, we want, and again, there's a high degree of ambition on our side, a reset of that relationship with Europe. And there's a whole range of specific elements to that, the SPS proposals, the recognition of mutual recognition of qualifications, the regulation of goods in particular. We're up for an ambitious conversation about that. I do think, again, people sometimes fail to recognise that, the problems, the evident problems, the challenges of leaving the European Union for the UK were obviously about a significant change in our terms of trade, but the political uncertainty that came with that was also a real problem. And so our decision to not relive, not to refight those arguments, but to focus on improving that relationship, practical things, as well as build those relationships with the Gulf, with India, maybe the US, look at how we've been an outlier in terms of our lack of engagement with China, how can we turn some of that around, difficult but important to do. And I think that is a much more comprehensive approach. And I think you've got to recognise, if you're, as we have done, leaving something like the single market, there's a cost there. You have to mitigate that. But I think a conversation just about Europe, honestly, it's not enough in its own right to give the UK the platform it needs.
You see yourself, Chancellor, in competition with Europe to some extent? You have a lot of international business people here. Somebody yesterday said that Britain's claim to fame is we could be the tallest tree in a not very tall forest, which was which was Europe. You look and see what's happened to Germany. You look and see what's happening in France at the moment. Do you see yourself in competition with Europe for international capital?
Of course, we want jobs and investment to come to Britain. We're here to represent the UK and all of our strengths. And look, you know, Johnny and I both voted to remain in the European Union, but we're outside the European Union. We have been for, it'll be 9 years this summer. We've got to move on. There are opportunities outside of the European Union. Opportunities, for example, in AI, where we have a very different regulatory approach to AI compared to the European Union's approach. That makes Britain a more attractive place for AI and tech companies to invest than in other European countries. We should take advantage of that, we should shout about it, and we should get that investment in. Just in the 6 months that we've been in office, £40 billion of private investment into AI and tech into the UK. That's really exciting. I think some of that has come to the UK because you look at the UK compared to other jurisdictions and we are a better place to invest. Take, for example, the Basel reforms. As I said, we've gone ahead of other European countries. We have that flexibility. We can be more nimble. We are taking advantage of that. That said, I was the first British Chancellor to go to the Eurogroup meeting of finance ministers in December in Brussels. We do want a reset of our relations. We don't want the antagonism and the battles that the previous government seemed to quite relish. It's why also I went to Beijing and Shanghai last weekend to re-engage there, the first economic and financial dialogue between our two countries for nearly 6 years. Got tangible benefits, particularly for financial services, quotas and licenses for British businesses doing business in China. So we are re-establishing ourselves in the global space, getting good deals for Britain, and that's what our jobs are, and that's what we're doing.
You talked earlier about making government more efficient. We made the joke about Elon Musk, but there was a point behind that. One of the complaints that business people had about your budget, there was this very large pay rises going out to the health and things like that, but without a kind of attached bits of reform with that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to make government more efficient, you'd like to see more evidence that that's actually beginning to happen.
Let's just remember where we were on the NHS when we came into government. Right? There have been so many strikes that was having a detrimental impact on business as well as individuals. Because when people are waiting months and months, sometimes years, to get the appointments and the procedures and the operations that they need, they're not available for work. We've got a problem in Britain that participation in the labour market is lower than it was going into the pandemic. We've got to sort that out. Some of that is about reforming the benefits system. We're going to do that. And some of it is about making our National Health Service work better. I don't think there's a business person that would have said 7 months ago before we came into office, you know, everything's fine with the National Health Service and making sure we've got a healthy labour market. That was a problem, and we fixed it by resolving that industrial action that had plagued our National Health Service for a long period of time. But, you know, Wes Streeting, our Health Secretary, is absolutely reforming the National Health Service, making more use of the private sector, for example, more drop-in clinics local to where people live, using technology better so that people can choose when and where they have their appointments. So we are absolutely using reform alongside making sure that we resolve that industrial action. Another area where there's massive opportunity in the NHS, going back to this issue around tech and data, is using data in the NHS to bring in money, but also to make Britain the best place in the world to do clinical trials. Massive opportunities there because of our integrated health service.
Something you said earlier, I think the message you were trying to put across is that your first priority is going to be to sort out spending now. Now you've got everything, hopefully on a firm thing, you're going to sort out spending before remotely thinking about the chance of more taxes or anything like that. And if you would actually also like to cut taxes in the future.
I would like taxes to be lower on people and on businesses, but I'm not going to play fast and loose with the public finances, because in the end, you actually don't result in anyone being better off, because it sends interest rates soaring if you lose control of the public finances. So I'm not going down that route. But if we can run the state better, if we can run public services better, if we can bring investment into the UK and grow the economy, we don't have to keep ratcheting up taxes to make the sums add up. That's where I would like to be, but we're not in that place yet.
But is there a certain level of growth, a certain level of something where you think you would then feel happier about reducing taxes again?
Well, look, I would like to reduce the burden of taxes, but I'm not going to make promises that I can't keep. Previous governments here and around in the UK and around the world make promises they can't keep. I'm not going to be that sort of Chancellor. We're not going to be that sort of government. But I think you can see my instincts is to do everything I can to make Britain a great place to do business and to invest. As Venkat from Barclays, I think, was saying yesterday, there's huge potential in the UK. We're just 6 months in as a government. We are taking the steps that are necessary to grow the economy. Can't turn everything around overnight, but I think people can see in all of the reform that we're driving forward that we are determined to turn around the low growth performance that has dogged Britain for too long now.
And I would just say on that, I mean, from my perspective as a government department, I'm absolutely convinced we could spend money as a country in a better way. You know, our industrial strategy is partly about coordinating government policy across a whole range of departments. I look at how we've done that as a country in the past. Did we get the effectiveness of that? You know, when we look at the different regulatory burdens in different departments, who considers the aggregate burden on business? I'm convinced we could do that. And we know, the media always want to know, you're going to spend more or less on something, or regulation more or less of it. It's not that. You know, it's about the proportionality of those things, the effectiveness of that. And we're up for that conversation, because that's how we'll make the biggest difference.
Rachel Reeves and Jonathan Reynolds, I'm very sorry we're out of time, but thank you for very robust defence of your policies.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage